Good evening and welcome to our event, TTRPG and Pride, a virtual panel celebrating queer gaming hosted by TourGuide Games. We are excited to convene this space tonight, and we know folks will be logging on and tuning in over the next few minutes. So as we get started, I wanted to take this time to introduce myself and who we are as a company. I'm Keiko Zoll, TourGuide Games co-founder and chief marketing officer. TourGuide Games is a virtual experience service provider leveraging the power of shared imagination to deepen social connections. Our expert tour guides transform ordinary game nights with friends into unforgettable excursions, and all from the comfort of your couch. You can learn more about our available games and book yours today at tourguidegames.com. So at TourGuide, we are committed to more than just having fun with changing the way friends play games together. And that's why we're here today, because if we want to change the way friends play games together, we're committed to doing our part to actually change the way tabletop games are played. We believe that gaming allows us all to transcend who we are into who we want to be, just for a little while. And when the game ends, who you are still matters. We recognize and celebrate the diversity of the tabletop gaming community, and our virtual events make space for these important conversations. I am honored and thrilled to be moderating a group of amazing folks tonight to talk about the importance of queer inclusion and representation in gaming. In honor of Pride Month, tonight's event not only celebrates our LGBTQ+ community in tabletop gaming, we're giving airtime to both the issues and resources that make every one of us more inclusive gamers and players. So quick housekeeping note, I may use the terms queer, LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQ+, interchangeably tonight. No slight is intended. I just kind of use them interchangeably as I speak. So now it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome and introduce our panelists for tonight's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Kira Keaton, Derry Luttrell, Nikki Yeager, and Ben Ptashinsky-Skinner. Kira Keaton is known to many online as Kira Rain and Lady Raincloud on Twitch. Kira is a disabled U.S. Navy veteran, gaming industry professional, and Twitch streamer. As a transgender woman, she's also a very active advocate for the LGBT plus rights and issues. Also with us tonight is Derry Luttrell, host and the gender nonconformist game master of Dice Will Roll, the gayest Pathfinder podcast on the planet. They're an animator by trade and a storyteller by passion. Derry is currently hosting Dice Will Roll's second campaign, Extinction Curse, which follows a traveling circus on their quest to save the world from an apocalyptic cult of dinosaurs. Derry, Dice Will Roll, and the podcast network they founded, Be Gay, Roll Dice, are all very invested in the goal of popularizing queer actual play podcasts with queer audiences. We're also joined by Nikki Yeager, creator of the Beholder to No One podcast. In December 2019, after realizing her husband was tired of listening to her talk about D&D, she launched Beholder to No One, and soon guests were invited from all over the tabletop gaming community, while Nikki made a bunch of friends in the process. It's been a wild ride, and her podcasting has expanded to include 2 more shows, Beholder to One Shot, a new show that allowed her to play non-D&D games every other week with members of the community, and Behold Clearlight, a horror-esque D&D 5th edition actual play she records with her friends and their husbands. Earlier this year, Nikki joined the cast of Awfully Queer Heroes, currently as the DM of the Uncaged anthology. She also has 3 new podcasts in the works, which we'll hear more about later tonight. And finally, joining us is Ben Ptashinsky-Skinner, an Orlando-based actor, singer, and comedian originally hailing from Pennsylvania. A 13-year Actors Equity Association member, Ben has performed at Walt Disney World under an equity contract since 2005, where he created and starred in several shows, most recently in For the First Time in Forever, a Frozen sing-along. Ben has been given the opportunity to perform with some of the greats from the original Broadway cast of Mary Poppins on live television, to writing and starring in a comedy sketch with Vanna White for Wheel of Fortune. From performing in commercials, television, and convention shows, and being inducted into the International Clown Hall of Fame, Ben has quite literally done it all. And one more role that is not in his professional bio. Ben and I starred together in a community theater production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Ben as Willy Wonka and me as Mrs. Bucket, Charlie's mother. It was a very, very long time ago. And it is a delight to have Ben join us. And for all of our panelists, I am thrilled to welcome you all here tonight. So without further ado, let's dive into tonight's conversation. So I would love to go around just kind of round robin style with folks and dive into this idea of how tabletop gaming and often the performing arts are often a natural home for the queer community. So I'd love to hear more about from each of you about your experiences and how you came to these gaming or performance spaces as a way of exploring your own identities. So whoever wants to kick it off, dive right in.
I think specifically when it comes to performing in the entertainment world, you are asked to be as authentic as possible, to tell a story truthfully. And because of that, it opens itself up to the LGBTQ plus community, because we are as authentic as human beings can be. And so the theatrical community most definitely welcomes people who are not necessarily considered quote unquote normal. And that is where I most definitely discovered who I was. And I imagine because of the stories that are being told through gaming, it is a very similar experience.
100% agree with you, yeah. I feel because in theater and in tabletop, you get to tell stories where, like, obviously there's the most straightforward thing, which is you can play a character that you're not and explore your identity more. Like, that's pretty straightforward. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to put that together. But what's really something I don't think a lot of people realize is that when you are playing a game like this, and if you're around other like-minded people, you can essentially craft a world where you and everyone else around you is okay with who you are, no questions asked. Whenever I'm running games, there is never any bigotry. There might be like bigotry, like, oh my God, you're an elf, I hate elves, blah, but like there will never be like actual bigotry, which we might have to face on a daily basis otherwise. Like I'll have, I don't know, the big bad say, I'll destroy your souls, but I'm going to respect your pronouns because I'm not that kind of bad guy. And I think there's a lot to be said there about the escapism of not just making a character, but making a world.
I think for me too, like, I'm 37. I've been in tabletop role-playing games since I was 15, and I played a male character once, literally once, in the first tabletop RPG that I ever got involved with, which was Rifts by Palladium Books. And after that, I would always play girls, and always like the sort of strong, sort of strong female protagonist kind of thing. Like I would always be like, a female paladin or something, like, powerful, big, powerful woman kind of thing. And I unfortunately dealt with people at the table who weren't okay with that. And I think that's kind of like one of the things that I love about expression in tabletop role-playing games is it also lets people like me, for example, through playing and through being other characters, sort of like learn yourself as well. Like, well, why am I always playing girls? Is there something going on there? Turns out, yeah, there was. So, that's, hopefully this is on the topic. I hope this is on the correct topic. But yeah, I think it's really great to be able to just be whoever you want to be at a tabletop game. And more often than not, most people don't care. They're not going to make a big deal out of it.
I think for me, I use music as my as my expression instead of theater, because I'm very introverted. I very much am shy and hated being on stage in front of people. But when I was playing an instrument, I could get lost into the music and play whatever I wanted and be whoever I wanted to be. And outside of music, I just read or wrote, and I was able to pretend to be in the story whoever I wanted to be. And there was no questions asked. There was no reality to the story, no matter how dark or not dark it was. When I was introduced to D&D at 15, 16 years old, I learned it's like, oh, cool, I can be whatever I want. This is awesome. And I don't even remember who my first character was. I just remember being able to explore dating women in a situation where I didn't feel like I could in reality. And I don't think I ever really played just a straight female character. I've played pansexual, bisexual, asexual, lesbian, but never really a straight character. And it's, even though I'm married to a guy, I'm just like, and I recently have come out openly to my family, it was just a way for me for 17 years to do what I wanted to do and didn't have the confidence to do outside of the gaming world.
I think, first of all, thank you everybody for sharing such amazing and like deeply personal experiences. I think that's one of the things that I have always been really drawn to about just kind of gaming in general and performance is like this ability to just kind of, you know, transcend a little bit of who we are, but at the same time, like Kira mentioned, like, you know, it gives us these outlets to explore parts of ourselves we may not be able to in, you know, traditional or normal settings, right? So I think it's just, it really speaks to just the power of gaming in general, to really give folks, you know, anybody who comes to the table an opportunity to not only explore and express a little bit more of themselves than they would in, you know, the regular world, but really think about, I thought, Kira, that your point that you made around like, why is it that I happen to play these characters more often than not? I thought that was like amazingly insightful, and just really reflective. Yeah, like, you know, it's I think sometimes it can be really easy to get caught up in the gameplay, but there's also some deeper things around there, around like, you know, when you come to the table and who you decide to play and what are your motivations. Like I've done the same a couple of times to like allow myself to play out some different roles I would normally play. But yeah, so thank you everybody for that. And actually, Kira, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your advocacy in the LGBT community, and kind of how you've seen Pride show up in your gaming spaces this year.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, as we all know, we've had a pretty rough year with the pandemic, which meant that most of my spaces had to transition online. But I think one of the coolest things is I'm a very politically active person. I'm actually running for local office while doing a bunch of other things. And it's probably not going to happen this year. We'll see. But we're also playtesting our first tabletop RPG that me and two other friends have been working on for the last 2 years, hoping to kickstart in December. And it was kind of interesting because one of the two people that is my partner is my friend Michael, and he's, 40-something-year-old, I hate to say it this way, but like cis straight white guy. Please forgive me for saying it that way. But he was in a playtest group with nothing but trans women. And it was really interesting to see how he handled that and how he grew and how he learned, and how he was willing to be educated and be corrected without like causing any issues and stuff, like without making any big deals about it. And I think like, with my advocacy in particular, I'm someone who's protested a lot. I've been politically active a lot. I'm very active in the political space on Twitch, and I'm always trying to push for more diversity and inclusion in the gaming space, and which is one of the reasons why I started the studio I started. And the other person on the team is a trans woman by the name of Jack Gardner, and she's going to be the prime story lead. So she's developing the story while I'm developing the mechanics. And we specifically sought out, trans and non-binary and LGBT individuals for the playtest. Both of our teams were full of trans men and trans women and non-binary people and LGBT people, and because they don't, a lot of these people weren't getting the safe spaces without creating their own. So like we were trying to do that. We were trying to create a space where people could come and enjoy RPGs together. Without any fears of like any actual bigotry at the table. And like Derry said, our world that we're building is going to be dark. It's got some bad stuff in it, but we did that because we want you to be the heroes and we want you to fight it. We don't want that actually at the table, right? So like while there might be some racism and some sexism in our world, which we want the player characters to be heroes to fight, we don't want that actually at the table, right? And a little bit too long-winded here. I speak too much, so just tell me to shut up so everybody else can go. But
No, you're fine.
I think like for me, it's always been, always having issues with things in D&D, right? One of the things that we did when we started designing the RPG that we're working on is me and my friend Mike were like a 20% rule, which is we're going to find 20% of a thing and change it. So, right, orcs aren't green, they're not stupid, and they're not evil. They're also not called orcs. And they have a culture. They're horse lords and plains people in their tribal shamanic culture. And, they're called the Hult. And their leader was a woman who pulled all of the tribes together in this one unified nation during a war of unification and all this other stuff, right? And it's not like they're not just... And I think that's the big part too, is advocating for writers and designers and people that are creating RPGs to do that, because you can't Thermian paradox your way out of this. You can't just say, well, that's the way it is in the world. Well, no, it isn't. You wrote it. You made that decision. So that's been a big part of like my advocacy as a designer, is pushing other designers to like really think long and hard about why you're building the world the way that you're building it, because people are going to ask you, and your response can't be, well, that's just the way the world is, because it's lazy and there's nothing to it. So hopefully that made sense and I didn't ramble too much.
I like your orcs already
No,
better.
that's...
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed
right?
me like noticeably perking up when you said that. That is really cool.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
But I think, Kara, too, you bring up such a great point around, we can shape the gaming industry the way we want it to be by designing the kind of games we want to see. And I think that's such a huge advocacy piece, whether it's, no matter the advocacy issue. And I think that's really tremendous. Derry, I love how you call Dice Will Roll the gayest Pathfinder podcast on the planet. I just think it's marvelous. I would love to know, like, what are your thoughts on how we make something like Pride a 365-day celebration, right? Where it's not just limited to the month of June, or, how we make queer inclusion and representation an authentic norm in gaming.
If you'd asked me this maybe even a week ago, I probably would have given you a pretty lukewarm answer of nothing new, nothing special. The last week for the tabletop community has been challenging. I'm not sure, I'm not going to go into it too much, but unfortunately there's been thanks to some old school gamers coming back and deciding actually transphobia is normal. It's been pretty eye-opening that we do have a long way to go. There are people out there who don't think that it's okay to be like anything we were saying, you should only be playing characters of your own gender. And on top of that, genders should have mechanical benefits, which has always been wild to me. Men should be stronger and women should be more charismatic, which is insane to say in the 21st century. But I think for that to happen in tabletop, it needs to have wider societal change, full stop. If it could be a normal thing, that would be great. But on the other hand, after having done a lot of thinking about this recently, I'm not even sure if I would, and this is just speaking for myself, honestly, I'm sure there are other people who would disagree quite vocally, but I'm not even sure I would want it to be a 365 days a year thing. I'm not even sure I would want to be considered normal, you know? Like the idea of normal when it comes to making this, obviously in tabletop, yes, we're getting there. It feels like we're almost closer in tabletop than we are in real life at times, because, you know, it's a relatively, it's a hobby, so there's less people playing it, and the people who do play it tend to be more accepting, because to play a game like this, you should probably be a creative person, and creative people tend to be more sensitive, and sensitive people tend to be more inclusive. That's for sure. I think that, to like stop meandering around the point, I had a lot of feelings on it. I think to get to the point, the thing that needs to be done is to continue promoting accessibility and like diversity in all corners of the game. Because it's one thing to say, yeah, queer stuff should be more mainstream in tabletop. That's perfect. But then there's other marginalized voices which aren't really heard as much in tabletop. There was a whole outcry against the very notion of having a wheelchair in D&D recently. And I think if we normalize other marginalized voices, if we bring in the disabled, both physically and neurodivergently, if we bring in people of all experiences and tell them, in this hobby, no matter what, you are normal, that's going to have wide impact, not just on the hobby, not just on the queer community, but on, well, society as a whole, I suppose. When we made Be Gay Roll Dice, when we made Dice or Roll, the idea was to start doing that. We didn't just want to be a gay Pathfinder podcast. The characters were all of different ethnicities, just like, you know, our players are. The shows that we brought to Be Gay Roll Dice bring people from all walks of life, and ultimately, I think solidarity is the only way we can expect this kind of thing to be normalized, by looking out at other people who are having not the exact same problems, but similar problems in their walks of life, whether it's, hey, it's hard for me to physically go to the store, or, hey, people are being racist to me on the streets because I'm from this part of the world, et cetera, et cetera. If we look out for them, they'll look out for us, and ultimately it'll make for a much more positive environment. So that's, to make a long story short, look out for the people who are also struggling, and they'll like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, you know, and it'll make stuff. I don't know if we will ever have a 365-day Pride, as much as I would love it, because, like, look at racism, it's been 200 years and still. But I think if we can even make the tabletop community a little bit safer, then there's not much more we can ask for in that regard.
Yeah, I think, you know, Derry, you raised such a good point too, that I realized I hadn't parsed out in the question, is this sense of the intersectionality, right? Like, we're not just one thing. Like, every time we show up to the table, we bring our whole selves. And so it's not just this one little piece of my identity that is showing up, you know, when I play a game. It's, here are all the parts, and kind of how are they interconnected and interwoven to one another. So I thought that was a really good point, that, yeah, it's not just about how do we raise and elevate just queer voices and experiences, but how do we do that for everybody who's been marginalized, right? Because there's a seat at the table, there's a seat at the gaming table for anyone and everyone. So I really appreciated you know, bringing up that intersectionality there. Ben, I would love to talk to you as somebody who is outside of the gaming space, but knowing that you are a champion for inclusion and representation. How do you find, or how can allies help? And where can they be most supportive, right? Because we're not always going to be in these spaces where we're always with the same people. And I think especially too, as Derry alluded to, some other things going on. Things are going to come up from time to time. So how can our allies be our best supporters?
I think, as Jerry mentioned, always stand up for people who can't speak for themselves. That's huge. But I like to look at my street, the street I live on, specifically as this beautiful example of how living our authentic lives is one of the most important things we can do as members of the LGBTQ plus community. We moved into our neighborhood in 2015, and my street is lined with people who do not vote the same way that we vote. So I don't want to paint our street in a homophobic light, but we were welcomed into the neighborhood. And about 2 weeks ago, one of my neighbors mentioned to me, he has 3 daughters, and he mentioned to me that he never viewed gay people as normal, and he didn't realize that we were human beings. And he said this in a very polite, and I know I'm painting him in a negative light, but his eyes were opened and realized that we were the same. And because we had lived our authentic life and we're raising our daughter the same way he's raising his daughters, we were just looked at as human beings and not labeled as homosexuals. And I think that's where we can come as authentically to the table as possible and represent ourselves, but also to touch on something that Kira had mentioned, this cis hetero surrounded by trans women being educated himself on the things that perhaps he was saying incorrectly. When you are explained either by an ally or a member of the LGBTQ or truly any minority that something you have said or done is inappropriate, rather than getting defensive or explanatory, perhaps we accept that we are all fallible and we all make mistakes, and it is okay to make those mistakes. This is where I get frustrated with our world. That is okay. Even if it's racist or homophobic or transphobic, is it good? No. But the mistake is acceptable. People are fallible. When you are called out on that mistake, if you apologize and move on and learn from that mistake, isn't that what makes this world a better place? So what I would call on, and to truly finally answer your question after 5 minutes of jibber jabber, what I would call on allies to do is, if you see someone make a mistake or say the wrong thing, educate them. And if you are in the shoes of making those mistakes, you learn, move on, and then don't freaking make that mistake again. And that truly is the best thing we can do in our world, I think, to support the LGBTQ plus community, whether you're in it or you're a part of the allyship.
That's such, I love all of that, Ben, especially too around, mistakes are going to happen. And I mean, I even see this within like my own, personal social circles, and even just in my own life, right? Like, I know that there are going to be times where I am tripping up somebody's pronouns, but I do make every effort, like, okay, they've told me, I need to like commit that to memory, right? But also, I think just being open to admitting that, yeah, sometimes there might be a mistake that happens, but it's correct it and don't make it again. I think that's such a great point. I think the other thing too that I see a lot around allyship, and I was just kind of thinking too around just intersectionality, is there's a phrase that I often hear: never about us without us. And so I think, I forget who mentioned it earlier, I think it might have been Kira, around making sure that the people that are at the table, that are designing these games, that are building these worlds, creating these narratives, that they are actually truly represented by the communities that they're trying to put out there. I think it's just fantastic too. Just especially that whole bit around like the mistake has happened, learn from it, don't repeat it, and let's move on and grow.
One other thing, if I can. Oh, sorry.
No,
Yeah.
of course. I was just going to say that doesn't have to just be about gay stuff. Like that can be the best advice that I've ever received, period, is if you make a mistake, it's okay. And when you're corrected, just move on. I'm sorry for interrupting, Kira.
No. That was me.
No.
One other thing about that too, about, correcting the mistake and moving on is, and I've seen this a lot, especially as a trans person, right? It changes for me. If I've introduced myself to you as Kara and she, her, and you don't get it right, we're going to have an issue, right? Because you have no excuses, right? If I've known you for 10 years and you've known me one way and another, I'm going to give you some time and some energy. And if you refuse at that point, then again, we're going to have a problem. But the big thing that gets to me is allies. And as an Indigenous person who's also trans, sorry to use the Ed Bull, I hate the word ally because alliances can shift and they can change. But what I really don't like in allyship is when you correct a quote unquote ally and they make a big song and dance about it. I'm so sorry. And they got to cry and they got to make you feel bad because, they're crying and they're upset. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Like, you didn't. It was a mistake. I know that you're trying, right? Like, very good friend of mine, almost my brother. His name's Steve. We've known each other for literally 20 years. Just the other day, he slipped up and he was like, "Oop, sorry," and kept on going. Yet another individual, and I didn't say anything, I don't berate him, right? Another individual decided to make a big deal out of it and started getting all super emotional about it. It's like, well, now you're putting it on me, right? My asking you to respect me is, and you screwing it up has somehow now made it about you. Stop it, right? Don't do that. Just, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, and move on. That's my thing. My little rant there. My apologies.
No,
Very
don't
good rant, in
apologize.
fairness.
Nikki, I know we haven't had a chance to really hear from you tonight, so I would love to hear more about, given your expansive podcast production. I know that you are trying to bring LGBTQ issues to the forefront in your experience as well. So I'd love to hear more about who out there is getting it right. Who are the people that aren't necessarily making mistakes, or if they've made them, they've made them and moved on and learned. But who out there is really getting it right with regards to queer gaming, whether it's podcasts, YouTube, Twitch channels? Who should folks be tuning into?
So I made a lot of friends that I've gotten very close to, and they kind of opened my eyes to other podcasts. And some of the ones that immediately came to mind when I was reading this question were Transplaner was one, 100%. They are a full trans cast, and they have a world where everybody is trans, no matter what. Every single person is trans.
What?
It's an amazing show, and it just became a podcast. It's on Twitch, and it's run by Connie, who goes by he, she, they, I believe. And they are POC, and it's just a wonderful group of people, and they are just such an amazing storyteller. Absolutely beautiful stories. Highly recommend them. The other ones, which I believe are actually in Derry's podcast network, is The Chosen One. They are on YouTube, and they are a animated D&D LGBT plus I don't even know how to explain it, but it's a beautiful story.
It's a strange one. I love it. They do so much with it.
It's a beautiful story with a full LGBT cast. They have a trans character in the story, and they don't make a big deal about it. It's just there. He is just a he, and he is there in a character in the story. I think in one episode they put a warning about it, and it was like somebody from their past who they're like, this is a possible trigger warning, and that is the only time there was a negative mention about it at all in the entire story. And it is a beautiful story that is focused on them just finding out who the next chosen one is versus, oh, is this person homosexual? Is this person trans? It's not focused on that, and I love it. Goblets and Gays is another one that is fantastic. They are also Pathfinder 2E.
Also in our network. Fantastic.
They also have, I believe, a full LGBT cast, and they are just, I don't know, it's just like, it's spectacular work to further explain it. For the one that I'm involved in, Awfully Queer Heroes, I was a guest. I was brought into the show, and it was created beforehand by Kel. And the whole point of Awfully Queer Heroes was to make it so that people of LGBT plus are felt accepted no matter your gender or sexuality. And it's run by a non-binary. It's creating a ton of Kickstarters related to LGBT plus spells and subclasses and homosexual pantheons, and it's just fantastic. And they were one of the people who actually helped me realize that I was asexual, because we were talking and putting two and two together. And as like a 30-plus-year-old woman, I'm like, wait, that a lot of that lines up. Like, I knew I was interested in men and women and I was bi, but that answers a lot of questions. Hold up. So it was just, they always welcomed people, and everybody there except for one person, I think, is LGBT, and the person who is super supportive and absolutely amazing.
Oh my God, that sounds incredible. I love that. And I love too that, you know, I think there's some of this other theme too, we're hearing about, like, it's kind of through playing and through thinking a little bit more about yourself in the process. And I think too, even to Ben's point where he was talking about, you know, being your most authentic, even if you're playing a role, whether it's in a production or at a gaming table, it still allows you to authentically explore parts of yourself. I wanted to, this is actually kind of going off script, but I wanted to kind of hear from everyone about how this last year, you know, living in a pandemic year, everything, I mean, as we're doing this here, this is a virtual panel, right? You know, I'd be very interested to hear from folks how this pandemic experience, this, you know, this experience of going online, of going virtual, how that has impacted your gaming or your performing. So that's kind of like question part one. And then question part two is, if a virtual space somehow might feel less intimidating to show up as who you are to a gaming table or in a role. So just kind of whoever wants to jump in, and yeah, we can go around.
I'll start.
Go for it.
You know, because again, we've been playtesting in tabletop game, and we can't play test it at the table, right? And you know, we've had multiple teams, and you know, playtesting multiple times a week, and it's been so easy for people to just sort of transition to using the new tools. And like, you know, we're on Discord and we're on Roll20 and we're teaching new tools, and people don't have to have their cameras on if they don't want to. They don't even have to talk if they don't want to, because, you know, we have, you know, text chats as well, which I know some people are like, how are you gonna role play without talking? Well, you know, like, if they don't want to like talk outside of their character talking, they can go quote OOC, you know, in the text chat and tell us what they're doing and things like that. And again, it's all about accessibility, because like, I'm kind of walking intersectionality, because as was stated earlier, I'm a disabled veteran, so I have like BPD and PTSD and a back injury and things like that. So like, it's about trying to make everything accessible. And I think what this has shown us is that the concept of the table is the same as the concept of home. It's wherever you want it to be, with whoever you want it to be, however you want it to be. And we don't need to be sitting in a basement at a table if we don't want to, right?
Yeah.
And even after the pandemic, why do we need to go back? I mean, sure, it's great to give hugs and have snacks and hang out, you know, and laugh and everything, but it shouldn't be the requirement anymore, right? It should be, you know, and we've even had situations where we've had a table and then we had, you know, like a tablet, because sometimes Critical Role does this, right? You know, like we have like a tablet with somebody on Discord or Skype or whatever who can sit there if they can't be there or whatever. And I think that's what I've seen with this is like all these new tools in the community adapting and proving kind of much like work, where actually, you know, you don't need to have your employees at a big giant building that just pushes out, you know, pollution into the atmosphere. You can have people at home and they can work. Well, you can have people at home and we can still be at the table together. And that's kind of my viewpoint on it.
I love everything about that. And it's also like, it speaks to so much of, you know, what we're doing here with just tour guide games in general, right? It's, you know, whether you're 4 friends around a table or 4 tables around the world, you can still connect to each other. There is still this ability to social connect. And we like to explore it through gaming. But that connection can still be there, you know, whether you're in person or whether you're, you know, over a Skype screen or Zoom or, you know, whatever it is. Has anyone else kind of, you know, had this, you know, similar experience, you know, over the course of the pandemic, or having to shift online with any of their gaming?
I mean, theatrically, most definitely, I went from making all of my money in person with having people and the necessity of being in the same space as I'm in to make that money. Going online is, like Kira said, environmentally friendly, but also my reach is exponential. So I have this huge online fan base, and because of Blackout Tuesday, I was able to kind of refocus where and write my own shows as opposed to working for these corporations who write the shows themselves. And I was able to write shows that included non-binary actors, that included people of color. And not only that, I got to pay them and pay them well because I was creating the space for them. And instead of having people have to come to me, I could bring the show into their living room and essentially gently shove a message down their throat without them knowing.
Yeah.
And every show that I did, I had basically an Ellen variety style type interview talking about, just like we're doing here, who we are, and introducing to a very heteronormative crowd the idea of a non-binary actor. And for instance, I wrote a Christmas show and Santa was black. Why can't Santa be black? And the fact that I was able to do it to my very heteronormative crowd without saying, come see my show that's going to educate you on the idea of being non-binary. I wrote a very funny show, and one of my actors just happened to not have pronouns. Not use the pronouns he, him, she, her. They use the pronouns they, them. And that was eye-opening to my crowd. And because of the PM. Sorry, I can't ever stop talking. I apologize. I ramble.
It's all good. It's all good. You're in good company here with that, I promise.
You're okay, because I unfortunately have nothing really to say on this one, because for 3 years before the pandemic, I was already only online. I live in a different continent to all my players. It is midnight here, and it's only 1 p.m. over there. So I have nothing to add here. I was like, uh-oh.
Right.
I will say that the last year has been interesting and a lot and kind of life altering for me in a good way. I started my podcast shortly before the pandemic had officially been like, hey, this is an actual issue we need to be worried about, and people started actually closing down. And I had played in-person games before that, but I had also played online games, so I had a good mixture of the two. So for me, switching to online wasn't as big of a deal as it was for some of my friends who don't like this online place. It's not as interactive. You can't see my face. I'm like, well, just put a camera on. Just get a camera and we can see each other's faces. Then we can show you how we're interacting. It's not that challenging. And then once we got cameras, it was a little bit better because then you could see that I'm about to talk in character. You could see that this person is going to talk. You're not going to interrupt them accidentally. And they started to like it a little bit more. So for a good year, we played just online, and still we're playing just online. But the biggest thing that this opened up for me was I got to play with people from all over the world. And when I started the podcast, I literally played with people from like a dozen different countries that I would have never dreamed of playing with, or had them on my show. And the internet helped me get that. And then ultimately, because of podcasting and because of this need to have something to do and because of being able to interact with all these people, I was not necessarily because I had the finances to do so, but I was able to comfortably leave a toxic work environment I worked at for 13 years. And now, while I don't make the same amount of money, I'm able to do podcast editing and within a couple of weeks able to get enough clientele to actually like justify doing that full time versus having to go back to a potentially another toxic work environment for a career I hate. So this last year has been fantastic, and it's all because of the people I've met and played games with online.
That's incredible. And it's very moving to hear too. I think for a lot of people, I think there's been a lot of moments of realization about kind of like what matters and what doesn't in the last 15, 16 months. And so I think that's one of the things that is just, it's very inspiring to hear that for people who are like, yep, I've had this realization, this is what matters, and I'm going to go for it. So I think that's awesome. That's really, really cool to hear.
Yeah, it was hard to not see family, but like having friends and building that was definitely a bonus.
Yeah. I think that's, one of the things too, when like we think about gaming is like, it's, yes, of course it's about having fun, but it's also, how can you really sustain some of those relationships that, may have been so physically pulled apart over the last year. So I realize I can't believe how fast this hour has actually flown by. So I'd love to wrap it up with one last question, again, kind of round robin style for folks. So as I mentioned at the top of tonight's event, that tabletop games, they allow us to be someone else even for a little while. And in some ways, I think more authentically be ourselves. And I see, gender and sexuality is really a process of becoming. It's not like all of a sudden it's like, boom, decision, right? Like I think folks here on this panel have expressed kind of in different ways how they've come to realization, and sometimes actually, through gaming. As gender and sexuality, or this process of becoming, it's not unlike, right, like building your, and I would love to, if folks here have advice like that they would give themselves, like if they were able to give to themselves like 10 years ago or 20 years ago or however, at the beginning of that journey of finding your identity, like what advice would you give for somebody, either for yourself like 10 years ago, whatever, or for someone who is queer or questioning, they're still in the early stages of their own identity journey? Nikki, why don't we start with you? Oh.
No, never mind. I'll play.
Honestly, I think it would just be try a little bit of everything. try something new and see if it sticks. And if you're at a table where you're not accepted, there are other tables, and don't let that kill your love for the game. Just try a different system, or try a different group, or try a different place. With the internet, you can find a group for almost anything if you look in the right places. So I know so many people and X game for them, and I'm like, and they didn't play again for 5 years. It's like, just go find a new group, find a new table, find a place that will accept you, that's worth it for you, because the other people weren't worth your time.
That's awesome. That's amazing advice. Derry, go for it.
Sorry. I think vis-a-vis exploring who you are as a person as well, like from the identity point of view, the one piece of advice I will happily give is there's a high chance that you might not get it right the first time. A few years ago, I was sure that I was bisexual and cisgender. Then I was like, actually, I think that I'm bisexual and gender fluid. And then I was like, no, I think I'm non-binary. Then it was like, no, I'm gender fluid. Then it was like, I'm back now to being non-binary, and who knows how long that'll last. Gender and sexuality and identity as a whole, often, like playing a character, you're going to re-roll stuff sometimes. You're going to be like, I don't know if this stuff is working for me. Let me try something new. And like, it's not a huge deal. You don't like, a lot of people think that you only ever come out once, but that's not the case. You're going to be coming out your entire life to people who don't know you, to people who knew you a while ago and haven't really got the memo yet. So really do not be afraid to like experiment. And even if you're only like identifying as something for a week and then you're like, no, that really wasn't me, that's fine. Like, you are the master of your own destiny. So when it comes to like settling down on a decision, ultimately I think my advice is don't. Just keep rolling with the punches and see what happens.
That's amazing. I love that. Pure Ben?
Ben, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, to build on what Derry was just saying, I think if you living your life or playing a character because that's what you think other people want from you, you're never going to enjoy playing that character or living your life as best as you would if you were just going to play that character authentically and live your life authentically. And I know I keep beating authenticity over the head like a dead horse, but truly, if you want to live your life, you have to be authentic. And the same thing with, I imagine, playing games and certainly playing a character in a show. You don't want to play how you think the people in the audience want you to play it, or the people in the cast want you to play it. You need to play the character the way that you would play the character, that you would become that character. So, and like Derry said, that changes day to day. So authenticity is the most important.
I think to finish off, for me, I like to tell people that being trans for me was like, when I was born, it was into a tabletop RPG that I'd never played, and the GM made my character for me. And now I'm playing my own character that I made because I know how to make my character now. And one of the things that I like to tell people, and obviously as a huge proponent of consent, this is like an internal thing, is examine your hard nose. Self-reflection. Why is it a no? Why? But do that for you. Don't let people push you, but examine your hard nose. And that's where I've learned. That's where I've had to like Derry said, learn that like, oh well, actually I'm pansexual lesbian, and I'm polyamorous, and how, I mean, I've been with my wife for 10 years. How are we going to work this out? And actually, I'm trans, and, like, and where I felt masculine and days where I felt feminine and things like that. So I think it's about self-reflection and like examine why you tell yourself no to things. Like, why are your hard no's? And if they stay hard no's, that's fine. But at least try to reflect a little and learn more about yourself, because nobody else is going to do it but you. You have to be willing to like learn about yourself and stop being your own worst enemy. And if it leads you down a journey, down an adventure, well, I mean, that's just great, because we're all adventurers in the end.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That is fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Just to kind of recap, because I think they were all such tremendous points. I don't want them to get lost. Is that, when it comes to finding your space and kind of finding your identity, it's about finding your group, that there is a table for you out there. You may have to look a little bit harder, but there is a table for you. And that as you're figuring out who you are, it's okay to re-roll what that's going to look like until you find something that fits for you and works for you in that moment. I loved Ben's advice around play the character the way you want to play it, not playing it to other people's expectations or assumptions. I think that's huge. And then as Kier kind of brought us home, that there's all of this that you're doing outward for others, but make sure you're taking the time to self-reflect on why it is that you're doing what you're doing, what are your hard lines and your limits, and kind of what's about that. And don't be your worst enemy when you're trying to build who you are. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, everybody, so much. Before we call it a night, I want to make sure for those that are tuning in at home, that they hear about the projects that you have coming up and where folks can follow along and get more info. So Kira, I'm actually going to lead off with you. Where can folks find you, and what's the next big project you're on, and what should we be on the lookout for?
Number one, if anybody, I need a job, so if anybody's looking, because being a community manager in the games industry has been really rough this last year, especially being trans. But number two, you can find me at Kira Raincloud on Twitter, twitch.tv/Lady Raincloud, RAYNE. It's Romeo Alpha. Romeo Alpha Yankee November Echo. Also, you can follow me at Song Siren, PSYREN. That is the Twitter account for Siren Song Studios, which is our LGBT-led and created and founded tabletop RPG company, started here in Dayton, Ohio. And stay tuned there, because we're going to be kickstarting our first tabletop role-playing game, Valor, the Fallen World, in December. So that's our next big project, which is a brand new. It's a brand new world. It's what we're calling a world scale IP, so a whole planet. A dice and mechanics system. We're not D20. We're not anything else. Using D12s. So using the quote stepchild of the polyhedral dice set, right? Our entire game system only uses D12s. That's it. So yeah, stay tuned for that. That's me.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Nikki, I know you have some new podcasts in the works. Tell us more about how folks can tune in and follow along.
First off, when that Valor game gets released, I would love to play it on my podcast. I'm just saying, that would be awesome.
Please.
So you can find me mostly at Beholder to No One and Twitter, but the two new podcasts that are in the works, we have characters created, we have art created. We have the first episode recorded for one of them is Dice Before Dawn, which will be Phoenix by Night, and that's a Vampire the Masquerade story where 5 vampires will be dealing with the Camarilla, some new, some old, and just trying to survive in the dark of night in Phoenix. And the other one is Sound Control RPG, which we are playing. This show is called Radio Signal, and that is a Savage World sci-fi game where we are kind of playing Firefly-esque, sassy, jokey type of game. I play a sassy robot in there, and it's great. She's amazing. She has a hot pink bow and a pink mini skirt. I love her so much. And the other game that I can't say when it's going to be released yet, but once Behold Clearlight is wrapping up, which is in the next couple of months, we are releasing The Morning Blues on Beholder Shinomon, which will be a Eberron Cowboy Bebop-esque bounty hunter game, which I am super stoked for. And we recorded the prologue and the first episode already, and I love the characters already. So I'm so excited to share it once Clearlight is done and finalized. But I can't say when, because then I would ruin how many episodes are left on Clearlight. So
Awesome. Thank you. Derry, I know you have a pretty sweet Pride lab that just dropped today. Tell us a little bit more about that, and then what else you have going on.
So today, it was supposed to come out much earlier in the month, but stuff always gets in the way. We released lots of shows from the Be Gay Roll Dice Network, specifically Dice Roll, my show, Gobson Gaze, The Eternity Archives, and Bits Before Crits, all of which are LGBTQ-led adventures. It's an interdimensional wrestling tournament called Crossovers and Combo Breakers, where heroes are taken from their own respective worlds and dropped into a weird, multi-dimensional tournament to fight for their lives. It's great. If you listen to any of those shows, you will almost certainly have a great time listening to it. You can also just check out Dice Roll, like I mentioned at the start of the episode. It is a queer-led circus adventure with dinosaurs, pug people, and a conspiracy following the works of a dead god. It's fantastic running it, and if you want to follow that through, you can check out diceroll.com.
Amazing. Thank you. And finally, Ben, you, sir, are a man of many talents. What is keeping you busy? Where can folks find you online?
I am on Instagram at EquityBen, where I have a cooking show that I air via my Instagram stories on Mondays and Thursdays. It is called Any Schmuck Can Cook, because during the pandemic, I was furloughed, and then I ended up retiring. We lost our nanny, and so I had to teach myself how to cook, and I did it live on Instagram every Monday and Thursday because my husband fed me to the wolves, and I had to feed our family. And it has become quite about 500,000 views, and so you can catch it every Monday and Thursday. I'm also nominated for Orlando's Best Actor, so if anybody anywhere in the entire world would like to vote, I've won 2 years, and last year I didn't find out the local radio station put an ad right above where you were the actor that won. So I am battling I'm battling corporate greed. So if anybody wants to just click the link in any forms, it will take you right to the voting site. And on TikTok, every Thursday, I put out a new Ring doorbell security video that happens in front of our house that comedically showcases my daughter. This week's video, my daughter comes across a package from Amazon.
Oh my God.
Me. I know.
Oh my God, I follow you. I didn't even realize. It took me. Sorry.
Yeah, that's me. No, I know. It's very uncomfortable for me to realize that I am famous, but I literally was just, I don't know how else to say it. I was stopped at dinner last night, and a lady wanted to take her picture with me, and my father, who is out of the fact that I'm famous, took the picture. But every Thursday I release a new video of my daughter herself. And again, we strive for acceptance through visibility, and I just want to show people that I have the same relationship with my daughter as any heteronormative couple would have with their kid. My kid just happens to be better than all the other kids out there. That's all.
You haven't met my daughter yet. I beg to differ, sir.
Right.
This is amazing. Thank you all so much. Thank you again to each of you. We are so grateful for your time and candor tonight. To learn more about TourGuide Games and to book your game night, you can head right on over to tourguidegames.com. Games are available to play, and they are booking now. And we hope all of our panelists and everyone tuning in tonight, you have a wonderful rest of the evening, a great rest of Pride for the 24 hours or so that are left. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.